With the history of the Las Vegas massacre still just hours old, people ask why. Today we're going to ask, how do we deal with it? And what can we do about it? I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Men, it would not require much of a setup to introduce the idea behind this show, because I don't know if there's anybody within the sound of our voices that has not been focused on this story since, it happened. For context and history, we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, October 3rd, 2017. I have two questions, really. Steve, in light of what we've seen in these last couple of days, how do you process such horror? And what I mean by that is, must it divide us, or can it pull us together?
Wow. I'm glad you asked this. I'm not sure I've got a good answer for you. I'm not sure I've got a real answer for you, but I'm going to try and work this out as we talk it out here. This is stuff that I kind of wanted to get into in my segment this week, where I was talking about how social media is making us so angry, even at the victims of a crime like this, and it absolutely breaks my heart to see this. But I couldn't get into this stuff in my segment because I choked up so badly. I had to cut myself short, which some people say would make more of my segments much better. But that aside, you know what? I think maybe the most important thing we can do is, we're all connected online. Certainly, everybody watching a show like this one, we're all just connected, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook, message groups, whatever it is. And whatever your hot take is, and I don't mean you specifically, Scott, I mean everybody. Whatever your hot take is, it's not that hot. It's probably kind of stupid. So you know what? Don't put it out there on Facebook. Don't tweet it. Don't put it out there. Sit on it. Wait. Calm yourself down. Wait until some facts come in. Take your hot take, type it out, and then try and poke holes in your own logic. But whatever you do, try and slow down. Try and think critically, because when something this horrible happens, your initial reaction is going to be emotional. It's going to be from the gut, and that can provide you with maybe the fire that you need to pull a shot victim to safety, or get them to the hospital if you're the person right there. But if you're not the person right there, your hot take is not hot. Let that anger settle down. Let some reason come into your brain. Don't put things out there until you've had time to think about them, consider them, and consider the impact that your words might have on people who have loved ones literally still bleeding in hospitals or worse.
What you just said, Steve, reminded me of something. I forget where I've heard this, but somebody once said that on a battleship, everybody has a job and everybody's working. On a cruise ship, people are complaining about the shrimp on the buffet. And I think that to a certain extent, we are all sitting around on social media mouthing off about our various discontents, reinforcing our preconceived opinions that we had before this happened. But if we were all in the same room together and somebody opened fire on us, something tells me that the spirit would change there. Something tells me that we would all pull together, that we would shelter each other, that we would help each other, and we saw that happen in Las Vegas. Bill Whittle, so many people have seen this horror that happened in Las Vegas, and at the latest count, 59 dead, 500 plus injured, and said, we must do something to stop attacks like this. And I have really a sort of a two-part question, Bill. Number one, if something must be done, who's primarily responsible for that? And then the second part of that question is, if nothing can be done, how now shall we live?
Well, obviously the answer that the people who are saying something must be done are calling for the government to do something. And I'm not going to get into the details of gun ownership or any of that argument. I make that argument 100 times. But what I think is driving that aspect of it is the belief that if the weapons are responsible for these kind of things, then the weapons can be destroyed and the problem goes away. That's how people think. And people think that because of the unbelievable degree of safety and security that exists in this country as a general rule. We have become the first generation in the history of the world that feels like we have that there is nothing bad allowed to happen to us. We're not allowed to drown in hurricanes. We're not allowed to drown in floods. We're not allowed to be killed in earthquakes. We're not allowed to be shot by lunatics. Any kind of a death other than a death of old age, surrounded by your loving grandchildren, is considered an outrage and considered something that has to be done. Now, the two things I want to address are what you mentioned when talking about Twitter. I think Twitter is interesting and dangerous for the owner, because I think that people tweet their first reactions. And I think the first reactions that we talked about in Steve's show are how they really feel. They're happy it happened. Good riddance to those Republicans. And I have to repeat what I said in that show. I can remember very clearly when I heard about that Nazi running down those people in Charlotte. My first reaction wasn't, yeah, go get those left-wing progressive bastards. They all deserve to die. My first reaction was, how are people, who's hurt and how badly, and what can we do to get this guy in jail for first-degree murder and then deal with him then. But my take on this in my Right Angle show, Scott, is going to be about the perspective of it. How big of a problem is this? And when you understand how small of a problem this is, you begin to realize that you cannot do much about insanity and murder. We live in a world that is so free as a general rule, as I'm going to point out in my show. We live in a society that's so free from insanity and murder that we think it's an event like an asteroid strike that needs to be prepared by NASA, or prevented by NASA, rather. We don't understand that moments like this are part of the human condition, that moments like this are the same fallible flesh and blood that went to the moon and did all these wonderful things. Well, that machine, that organism can break, go defective. And when that happens, this happens. So the question is this a society-wide thing that has to be remedied by society-wide changes, or is it in fact so infrequent that it becomes a case of simply broken people? And that's what I'm going to be talking about in my segment today.
And I think that, you made me think of the story from the beginning in the Old Testament. The first sin was rebellion against God. The second was murder. I mean, that's the second one you really hear about. And there was wasn't like, hey, Cain started smoking dope, and next thing you know, he was pilfering small objects from Abel's field, and then after a while, they got in a shouting match. And no, the second thing that we hear about is he beats him over the head with a rock and kills him. And it also, I think, illustrates that it doesn't really matter what the tool is. The impulse, as you indicated, Bill, is in the heart of man. And it has not been able to be bled out of us over the course of many centuries. It's every time something like this happens, you have that reaction that Bill described where it's, oh my goodness, who's hurt? How bad is it? Kind of what, is there anything I can do? People, after the 9/11 attacks, when people lined up to give blood in a situation for which no blood could be received. And in this case, in Las Vegas, they certainly do need it and are able to use it. But people have this instinct of, I want to help initially, and then we start to say, what happened? And then, in a sense, we distance ourselves from that kind of thing. This guy's a monster. He's an animal. Nothing like that could ever happen in my neighborhood or in my household, or I would never shoot anybody or anything like that. And sadly, we don't know. We'd like to think that way. I'm sure this guy didn't grow up when he was 12 years old and say, someday I think I'll go out and massacre, several dozen people. It's a sad statement. And Bill, I think, summarized it nicely. Humans are capable of amazing things. And humans are also capable of awful things that even creatures in the animal kingdom wouldn't engage in. At least they just fight for food and sexual dominance and things like that. So I think that we need to approach these kinds of incidents when we say, how do you process it? I think prayer is part of it. I think talking to people is part of it. I think having a little humility is part of it, and not immediately insisting that this, reinforces some previously held point of view that you had. And how do we stop things like this? I don't know that we can. I'm not saying we should do nothing. I mean, if you see somebody who you think is suicidal or crazed, you try to do something. If you hear somebody threatening people, you do something about that. But I don't think after the fact, after it happens, you start beating yourself up and saying, look what we have become. We've always been like this. And every once in a while, it breaks out in egregious ways. And I pray that it never happens again. And I know that it will.
Yep.
For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green and the entire Right Angle team, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.